Hear the cannons roar. See
Thank you.
bullets
Okay, so now I
fly.
have the pleasure of
Feel no
introducing to you
fear.
my dear friend Todd Fink. If you go to his website, you will see that he is an artist and a speaker, and he is the founder of Kind Mind Podcast, which will give you spiritual sustenance and ear candy for hours and hours and hours. And he'll make you think. He's also the co founder of the Giving Tree Band. His songs and videos and writings and lectures have inspired so many. And along with his brother E. Fink, Todd co founded this acclaimed musical group, The Giving Tree. His albums have reached the top 40 in the American radio charts, and Kind Mind Podcast has been a top 40 show in the category of alternative health. He holds a certificate in addiction counseling and mindfulness teaching, and he's earned his psychology degree from Georgetown University. His essays have been published in hospital newsletters, Elephant Journal, Peace Planet, and Global Harmony Crew, among others. Lifelong student of meditation, Todd works fervently to help individuals, organizations, and communities build sustainable cultures of well-being and peace. And that's what his website will tell you. But what I know about him is that he is just such a treasure. Not just his words and his wisdom, but his consciousness helps to, in every time that I've encountered him in a conversation and had the privilege of listening to him, he brings like a tonality of just anchored peace. Like he actually walks his talk. And I have had the privilege of co-creating with him many times. I feel like I come in like 1,000 horses. And we've done Howl in Harmony and a few other things together, and it's always just a privilege to get to experience what he brings to the party. And so, open your minds and your hearts and your hands, and let yourself just receive, and be ready to have a great conversation. And without further ado, please welcome my dear friend Todd Fink.
Thank you so much, Maureen. Thank you, Spiritual Speakeasy community. It's a pleasure to reconnect with you today, to return and share some thoughts on the life and wisdom of Ralph Waldo Emerson, who, like me, went by his middle name, but that's he went by Waldo and I go by Todd. My first name's Michael, but that's the only comparison I'll draw, the only parallel of my life to his. He's known as the Father of Transcendentalism because of his reactionary or dissenting movement that he started. It was mostly a literary and philosophical movement, because he felt like the institutions of the time were not, especially the religious institution, were not inspiring the spiritual fire that was needed to actually experience the divine. However, transcendentalism was actually a pejorative term by the contemporary critics of the time, meaning Emerson and the others that were part of this movement, like Louisa May Alcott and his pupil Henry David Thoreau, that they were beyond reason. They were beyond being able to reach, because they were so far off with their ideas. But if you take this word transcend or transcendent and look at the etymology of it, trans means across or beyond, and scandere, where we get send, means to climb. And Emerson literally and figuratively climbed out of the times intellectually, and his work was considered by Oliver Wendell Holmes to be the American intellectual declaration of independence. But what I mean by climb literally and figuratively, he was born in 1803, and his father was a minister, so he was being trained in that religious tradition. But by the time he was 8, his father had passed away, and his mother was a widow raising 6 kids, I believe. And he was able to endure that. They suffered a lot, and he was able to go to Harvard and graduate, and then he returned to Harvard Divinity School and began preaching. He became a pastor, but he grew disillusioned, especially after his wife died 2 years into their marriage from tuberculosis. and there's slavery at the time. And so you could just imagine the intense pressure and challenges that he was trying to understand and work through. He started the Atlantic Monthly, which we know today as the Atlantic magazine or the Atlantic publication. It was mostly created as a call to abolish slavery. He called slavery a conspiracy, and where others considered it an institution, he called it a destitution. So there were just many examples of how he was challenging the systems of the time. His philosophy of transcendentalism became uh, merged with nature and the natural world. He considered himself a naturalist. And today I want to talk a little bit about some of his prominent collections of essays. One is Nature, another is Self-Reliance, and a third is The Oversoul, which is nice that Clive introduced the song about the soul, because we'll be diving into that a little bit more. But unlike the contemporary religion of the time, he didn't believe man was separate from nature. He felt like nature was inside of man, and therefore, in the essay of Self-Reliance, human beings could look for the divine within, had so much more to realize about the truth through their own personhood by going deep within themselves. And there's a particular concept called the transparent eyeball. When I read this as a kid, it captured my heart. And I felt like ever since then, I was trying to experience what Emerson was describing. So I'll share that with you. Standing on the bare ground, my head bathed by the blithe air and uplifted into infinite spaces, all mean egotism vanishes. I become a transparent eyeball. I am nothing. I see all. The currents of the universal being circulate through me. I am part or particle of God. End quote. So I think that when you parse through these lines, it's most likely that they're describing some kind of awakening experience that Emerson had. If we look at the idea, if we think of the idea of a transparent eyeball, transparent means either see-through or invisible. So I think that is indicative of selflessness or egolessness. There's no longer me and nature, or God, or me and the universe as separate, that is antagonistic. There's a continuation of the being, but still being an eyeball that's transparent indicates seeing, that there's something to perceive, or there's a cosmic consciousness to this experience. And I am nothing, you could say that means that he doesn't exist, or it means that he's not limited as a thing. He's not just the human body or the form, that the essence of our soul or our spirit is the universal spirit. If the poet Rumi, the medieval Sufi poet, taught us to be quiet, and that the quieter you are, the more you can hear, then I would say Emerson taught us that the slower you go, the more you can see. And we get many beautiful quotes and famous aphorisms or words of wisdom from Emerson that I think can just totally change your day, uplift your day, or transform your life in a moment. Like hitch your wagon to a star, or always do what you're afraid to do, or adopt the pace of nature. Her secret is patience. So Emerson also was primarily an essayist in his writings, and a poet. And I think there's something also spiritual about that, because essays and poems are concise. So I think that reflects his humility. They are elegant, works of literature. He was able to travel to Europe at one point in his life, and he met other luminaries of the time, including Samuel Taylor Coleridge and William Wordsworth. Their elevated status made him believe that he was going to be encountering some truly extraordinary men, but he found them to be quite ordinary in person. So it made him think that if these great men are quite ordinary, then perhaps ordinary men and women could really be extraordinary. And I think that is the humble wisdom of Emerson, that and that's reflected in his essay Self-Reliance, that we don't have to be bound by previous masters. We don't have to be bound by tradition. We don't have to be bound by institutions. That the present generation is always the most important generation. The most important moment is the now. It's not any less than any past moment. So he puts so much emphasis on the potential for freedom for every individual. And then there is the essays in nature. I'd like to share a little bit about this because I think it draws us into the natural world and cultivates gratitude in one's heart. More servants wait on man than he'll take notice of. Nature and its ministry to man is not only the material, but is also the process and the result. The wind sows the seed, the sun evaporates the sea. The wind blows the vapor to the field. The ice on the other side of the planet condenses the rain on this. The rain feeds the plant. The plant feeds the animal. And thus the endless circulations of the divine charity nourish man. It's very beautiful imagery of how all nature, as he says, is an expression and permeation of one metaphysical essence of the universe. So it's not mankind fighting with nature, it's nature interacting with itself. Something else that Emerson said that I think is important, that would not leave future generations bound to his ideas. He said that everything he worked on, all his writings, did not represent some objective certainty or final truth, because basically he understood that there will have to be another generation of transcendentalists, that we all ought to be our own transcendentalists, which means we don't just endorse the views of the transcendentalist period in literature, but we're always trying to climb beyond the present circumstances. We're always trying to climb beyond where the institutions try to trap us, or where conformity removes the spark of seeking, or puts out the spark of seeking. So I'd like to talk about one other essay before I turn it back over to the group, and then we can continue with the conversation. But this other essay or collection of essays known as the Oversoul, and I'm glad Clive opened us up with the concept of the soul in his music, because I think that these ideas in this essay are enduring and touch on something truly universal. So it deals with four themes and he said that the human soul is immortal and immensely vast and beautiful. But why does he think that there's a soul? Because when you look at life, you can tell that there's something animating it, that there's something spiritual about the aliveness that goes beyond matter. Not that matter and spirit aren't somehow connected or part of one whole, like gravity and magnetism, and how all the forces form one universal framework of energy, but that there's something beyond, something that transcends the ego. And that's the second theme, that our conscious ego is the small part. The soul is actually the infinite part, and the ego is limited in time and space, despite the fact that we habitually mistake our ego for our true self or our true being. And then the third point of this essay is that on some level, all of the so-called individual souls of people are connected, though he doesn't know exactly how they're connected or at what level they're connected, but that there is a unity. That's what is meant by the oversoul, that there is some unity of metaphysical essence that we're all part of. And it makes me think that what happens to us is that we get our circulation cut off from the oversoul. Sort of like when you sleep on your arm, and author Colin Wilson once described it like that. If you sleep on your arm and you wake up and you don't have feeling in that part of your body, so you almost forget, you can forget how expansive you are, and then the responsibility is to uh, revive the circulation into that part of the body. And that's really what the spiritual practices or the spiritual search is, the reviving of our circulation with totality. And the fourth part of this essay is that the soul is still created by or has an existence that is similar to God, or rather, God is within all. And I think here by God, it's not the limited idea of God. He still believes in God, but I think he doesn't believe in any limiting definition of God. He probably would understand today why it may not always be appropriate to use the word God because of all the baggage it carries, or because of how limiting the definitions are. You'd probably say, how could God be contained in a definition? How could God be contained in a doctrine? How could God be contained in a tradition? So this is really radical stuff for the times, politically, spiritually, and socially. He did have some influences. When he went to Europe, he met an older artist, Thomas Carlyle, who inspired him. He was inspired by the philosophy of Immanuel Kant. I think Kant's ideas like the categorical imperative sets an ethical tone for one's spiritual journey. And then, of course, he influenced generations after him, but is probably the most famous and prominent pupil of Emerson's was Henry David Thoreau, who lived on Emerson's property when he was writing Walden. He built a shack on Emerson's land to live deliberately in the woods, as he describes in the beginning of that transformative work, that iconic piece of American literature. And then there was one other poet that he refers to often and included in his essay, Nature. I'd like to read this poem because you can kind of see the seeds of Emerson's thought. Man is all symmetry, full of proportions, one limb to another, and all to all the world besides. Each part may call the farthest brother, for head with foot hath private amity, and both with moons and tides. Nothing hath got so far, but man hath caught and kept it as his prey. His eyes dismount the highest star. He is in little and all the sphere. Herbs gladly cure our flesh, because that they find their acquaintance there. For us the winds do blow. Earth doth rest, heaven move, and fountains flow. Nothing we see but means our good, as our delight or as our treasure. The whole is either our cupboard of food or cabinet of pleasure. The stars have us to bed. Night draws the curtain, which the sun withdraws. Music and light attend our head. All things unto our flesh are kind. In their descent and being to our mind, in their ascent and cause. More servants wait on man than he'll take notice of. In every path he treads down that which doth befriend him. When sickness makes him pale and wan, O mighty love, man is one world, and hath another to attend him. Finally, we learned that Emerson was also immersing himself in the literature, the spiritual literature of the East. And I just think this is really profound for his time, because now anything is a Google search away for us. We have a whole library. The library at Alexandria is in our cell phone. But for somebody during his time to access the Bhagavad Gita and the Vedas, I mean, I can only imagine the effort that it would take to find these books, to study these books, to get a translation. But he was reading the Vedas, he was the ancient scriptures of Hinduism, he was reading the Bhagavad Gita, and I think he related to the concept of the Atma in Hinduism, which is the soul, and then the Paramatma. Para means supreme, the supreme soul. The Atma is the illusion of a separate soul, but the truth is supreme Brahman or Paramatma, which is the Oversoul, as Emerson interpreted it. So he's drawing from all different types of thought around the world, which is what I think we need to continue to do. We need to integrate the wisdom. And when we think about today's collapse of meaning that pushes people towards fundamentalism with religion or towards nihilism, what we really need is a philosophical and spiritual attitude that makes room for everything, that gets in tune with the wisdom of the indigenous peoples of the world, that brings us back into our bodies and exploring our own hearts and diving into the nature of our being. And that, I think, is creating like a new type of meaning, a meaning 3.0, because religion let us down. Religions let people down. Institutions ultimately let people down because of greed, because of capitalism. And that creates, that fosters more and more division and polarization. So I think we're living in a time, in a critical time, where we can draw upon the wisdom of this time, in Emerson's time, because look what was about to happen in his life, the Civil War, and just some of the most intense social upheaval in the short history of America. But I think we find ourselves there again, and it's worth drawing on the inspiration of somebody like Emerson, who had to break free from so many shackles of conformity. So I'll conclude my talk here and just remind you that um, nature is within us. We are nature. And if we try to be the transparent eyeball, that means that we want to see more by slowing down, and we want to be more. We don't have to do more, we need to be more. And by humbling ourselves in that way, we actually, there's a paradox there. By humbling our ego, we become infinitely vast. So I thank you for this opportunity to share more about the life and philosophy of Ralph Waldo Emerson, and look forward to conversing further in our conversation.
Thank you, Todd. You gave us so much to think about. And it also does feel like this is a secular movement, in that, like, in his essays he's asking us, like, not to imitate, not to go by the dogma, not to go by these old creeds, but to, like, find it in your heart what is true. And so that seems like the constant, that seems like the constant that we're all invited to, no matter what your religions, no matter what your creeds tell you. But what is the truth for you? In the beginning of this series, Roots and Wings, I kicked it off with a little Emerson, and I read a bit from Self-Reliance, and about that section that was inviting us into moving away from imitation, which he quoted as being like, spiritual suicide, and into relying on that inner self. and I read that when I back in practitioner class, and I read the overview, but I invite people to read, to tap into that piece of writing. But I haven't read the overview in a long time. And when I was thinking about this talk with you, there's this word soul that came up in the song, and you presenced it as well, and it's just been coming up a lot for me. And there's a section in the overview, just a little paragraph that I wanted to read. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. And it's about the soul, and it says, "A man is a facade of a temple wherein all wisdom and good abides. What we commonly call man, the eating, drinking, planting, counting man, does not, as we know him, represent himself, but misrepresents himself." And like some of these concepts, like we're like, yeah, I get that. But imagine it back in the day, like when you were saying, like he had to go search for the Bhagavad Gita. I have 2 of them on my shelf right now, and they're carrying dust. Like it almost seems like we have a banquet of information before us, and we don't even know how to begin to nibble on it. So I imagine that his search for meaning, that the journey actually made the meal even more appetizing. So anyway, it goes on to say, he does not
Good point.
right, he does not respect but the soul, whose organs he is. Would he let it appear through his actions, it would make our knees bend. He's talking about the soul. When it breathes through his intellect, it turns out as genius. When it breathes through his will, it's virtue. When it flows through his affections, it's love. And he's talking about like how the soul can be demonstrated, because it can't really be defined. But when we connect with that soulful space that we are, it turns out as a genius. And I just would love to hear your thoughts about soul, because it just seems like one of those topics that is coming up for me, and I don't really. I think it's more of an experience. But anyway, I'll pass it to you. That's my first question.
Beautiful. Thank you, Maureen. And yes, I mean, I really am just so moved by how much he transcended the contemporary thought. In philosophy, we sometimes refer to this as hermeneutics, which means it's very difficult to assess the thinking and practices of a different era, because we actually can never put ourselves into that conditioning. And you see this sometimes when, like, I don't know, maybe like TV analysts rank athletes or the 100 greatest athletes of all time. And should it be Michael Jordan or should it be Muhammad Ali at the top? But people who watched Muhammad Ali didn't live in a world with Michael Jordan yet. And people who loved Michael Jordan didn't live in a basketball world that had a LeBron James. And so it's just that you also run up against this problem with religion and spirituality and the times. So the ideas that Emerson was putting out about the soul were quite revolutionary for the time. My ideas about this would be that Emerson says to carry solitude wherever you go. I think it's pointing to it, and slowing down, like I said before, reveals it. And if we come back to when Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am," I think another way to understand this is that I am an ego because I think. When you're in a flow state, or when you're in meditation, or when you're in deep sleep, there's no I-ness. Anything that could be said or done for myself is ego, is false. It's part of the phenomenology of the universe. But it really resonated with me in the description of the transparent eyeball, that when all mean egotism vanishes. This is the whole reason to seek the truth, because if egotism made everything better for everyone, then I would say it wouldn't matter if the ego is true or not. Sort of like if realizing God or reaching enlightenment, um, doesn't make you ethical, then I would say that it's not really worth pursuing. if it doesn't include ethics and happiness for all, then what good is it? So so this soul being tied to the thread of all life is almost like a doorway to unity. If we understood that all the ideas about separation were wrong, then we would realize that it's self-injury to destroy nature, that it's self-harm to cheat our our brothers and sisters, or to take advantage or to exploit anyone. You're only harming yourself because, like I said, because we cut off the circulation. To that, I came up with a poem inspired by all this, that arrogance and shame are psychological survival knots applied to emotional wounds that restrict our circulation, restrict our connection and the flow of connection, and reinforce the sense of separateness. So our responsibility is to untie these knots and revive our circulation with totality, and feel back into what was only a tingling sensation that everything is doing everything. So, thank you.
Oh, love that. I love that. Yeah, I often quote that Dick Carr quote of "I think, therefore I am confused." And that's where my thinking leads me to. I think, therefore I am confused, and I can use thought as a defense mechanism. And instead to move out of thought and into experience, like you said, like the tingle of everything is tingling everything, or something like that.
Yeah.
That and the awareness.
Unnumb.
What's that?
Unnumb ourselves.
Yeah, unnumb ourselves, and that the awareness that I think helps with that is that there's, as you were saying, that there's 1,000 servants that are supplying us right now. Like the nature of nature is to be in harmony with nature, and we have decided to wrestle with nature instead of be in harmony with nature. And to be in harmony with nature would be to move into gratitude that there are 1,000 other forms and other hands and other stimuli and other shoulders that we stand on, and other things that are supporting this moment, like live song, like the winds, the trees, the rocks, like all of this is supporting this moment. And to move away from what do I think of it, because who gives a shit, but how am I in harmony with it? How am I in the ebb and flow of it? How am I present with it? Which feels very intimate and very freeing and very peaceful. And in that last self-reliance, he says what the Course in Miracles says, which is the only place you can find peace or get peace is from yourself.
I was going to say, Emerson has quote, he goes, what lies behind us and what lies within us are tiny compared. No, what lies
behind and ahead.
Yeah, what lies behind us and what lies before us are tiny compared to what lies within us.
Yeah. And that's, I think that's the concept of a temple too. Like this is a temple, the facade of a temple, but go in, enter into that. Thanks for sharing that, Rachel. And thanks, Maureen.
Yeah, and Todd, I really also liked what you said about by humbling our ego, we become infinitely vast. It's like we become these extremely powerful beings when we're in connection to source, So life becomes like magic again, like you were a kid and everything is possible, and the trees speak and the birds are,
and there's a unity with all our harmony when we're silent too, because when we're in the woods, we're not fighting, we're not proving anything to anyone. When there's silence in the mind, also like in a flow state, isn't that when we're also most effective? When we're just creating or painting or flowing with music, or in a dialogue where you're not trying to win or argue or anything. There's just like something spontaneous happening. I like how C.S. Lewis described humility. Humility is not thinking less of yourself, but thinking of yourself less. This meaning when I'm not like so encumbered by my story, by meanness and concerned with myself. Meaning, if you're serving, you're transcending. You know, Swami Vivekananda said the best life is one of unconditional love and selfless service. And that's the paradox too, that if you actually operate against that, you become small. When you try to make when I try to make myself important, I feel smaller. When I'm quiet and concerned with the all, I feel infinite. So these are
Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting because when you think about how we are each being served by 1,000 invisible hands, and yet we sit back and say, sure wish something was happening. It's like we look at the world in any way and say this is not supposed to be, or I wish this was a little bit different. I wish there was more salt in the soup. I wish I had a better view. I wish I was less fearful of speaking up. All of those things and so the threshold of coming to that harmony in that service is to forgive ourselves for thinking that something went wrong.
at what is the barrier to the celebration of all that ministry to mankind. It's the mean egotism, right? The flowers don't charge us for their scents. The bird doesn't charge for its songs, for its concerts. The trees don't charge for their fruits. Yet our existential fees go up and up and up and up. What is that about? The mankind is totally nourished by nature. But the egotism, the separation of man and nature, uh, creates all the trouble.
It's interesting. I mean, it's really interesting because, you know, I, here's a question for you. I am of service in many different ways, and in certain ways, in regards to charging, I feel in my present state like all is well. I always have more than enough, and I'm well cared for by the world. And I also am on this cusp of this conversation around helping entrepreneurs move into a more expansive reach for themselves, and maybe moving out of blocks and fears, and on the cusp of charging something more than I've ever charged before. And there seems to be within that a little tug of war, a part of me says like it doesn't matter because it doesn't matter, and then another part of me feels like service I should just always give it away. So in regards to applying any of this to my life, I can find my ego rushing from either side of the seesaw. Too much, not enough. Too much, not enough. And I just wonder, if you want to take this to a more applicable experience, like, how do you? Because I know as a musician, like you value your music. As a speaker, you value your time and energy. And how does that play into it? Because flowers are fed by the waters of the world, and we're not.
Yeah, I think there can be a tug of war, and there probably ought to be, because Emerson had a long tug of war while he was a Unitarian minister and trying to grapple with the tradition and the challenges of the times and an envisioned future. So I think that something to keep in mind with our psychology around money is that it's another form of energy, like food, like knowledge. And somebody once talked to me about the amount of effort I was putting into to teach or to share, saying like, you could do more. And because if you have some knowledge that could help people, it's like not too different than having money that could help people. And I really wasn't thinking of knowledge in that way, that am I a hoarder of knowledge? So now I just, with the podcast and everything, just like get it all distributed. Anything that has been helpful to me, or any knowledge that came to me, now I can see that as another abundance. I don't always have, abundance with other things, with money. But I think abundance mindset here is that trust is important, because if we're trying to raise a fee or do anything enterprising, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. But if it's coming from a scarcity mindset, it becomes a habit. In trust, it creates an abundance mindset. I think of abundance not as an amount, but simply the trust that I always have more to give. There's always more to give through this vehicle of Todd. And then maybe money, maybe time, it may be knowledge, maybe words, it may be food, it may be presence or whatever. But if what we're doing disconnects us from that trust, then it means it's probably in the service of our ego. And if what we're doing, or if because of that, we ever create a barrier to any sincere seeker to learn, or to share in the fellowship. And as long as that there's not a barrier to people, because ultimately we want the people who most vulnerable to have access to service, right? Woody Guthrie said something like the artist's job is to comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable. So I keep those points in mind and ask myself, am I tuning into abundance and trust? And when we think of abundance that way, then there's no scarcity mindset. I don't need to raise this fee because I'm worried that I won't have what I need. But maybe it feels like this is what is natural for everything that I'm doing to become more expansive in the exchange of energy from the divine.
Look at like I mean, we have these teachers who like lived out on nothing in the middle of Walden Pond. Actually, my sister and I went to his home and got to see like the minimalist way that he just lived with nature. It was a really cool trip, and yet we also have the opportunity to be in these other classrooms of commerce and of consumerism and of finances and I think it's interesting to entertain like what does that look like in regards to this, because it feels like it goes against our nature. Actually, in some ways, it feels like it goes against our nature. But here's another thing that I have come to become aware of is when I put an offering out on the table. If I say it's for free, like I said, I have 2 Bhagavad Gitas in my on my shelf in there. I haven't read either of them. If it's for free, I don't reach for it. And when I offer something and I put a price tag on it, it's almost like that price tag is like the oven that causes that heat to come around this offering that makes it rise in value for people and almost makes it taste better for them because they have psychologically bought into something and invested in it and have made an exchange. So otherwise it just feels like flat yeast on the shelf, as opposed to I'm going to bring this is a life exchange. And I know like when you give talks, you have a life exchange. You're bringing your energy to that conversation, and it's in real time, or it's a podcast that you listen to later, but that you have put some energy into it, and I don't know. So
yeah, so those are all beautiful points, and I would just add to that, when I reflect on the work that I'm doing, like with the podcast or retreats or workshops or anything, that there needs to be good opportunities for exchange, as you said. Just because maybe I'm talking about something and sharing some specific kind of knowledge doesn't mean that the others don't have something to share back. And there's a different kind of danger when everything is given seemingly freely and there's no opportunity for reciprocity, because that also can create a hierarchical structure. I'm the one that gives to you. This is why there's so much risk of abuse, and there's so many important codes of ethics between like a doctor and a patient, a teacher and a student, a coach and an athlete. because there can easily seem to be an imbalance of the giving. Like the coach is giving all this training for nothing, or the teacher is giving his or her life's work right to the student in the school and all that. So there's a vulnerability there, and I think the more we attenuate hierarchies, and this is the challenge and the hard thing for those teachers that get put up on pedestals and become very exalted, because it's very easy to take advantage of that and then end up, in the service of your own ego once again. But yeah, if we try to think of it as the financial exchanges, or creating these opportunities for people to show that they value the time and the content, then I think it actually can reduce hierarchical. It can attenuate the hierarchies in a way that is beneficial for all.
That is gorgeous. Thank you so much for laying that out there. I really appreciate that.
Thank you for helping me reflect on it and understand myself.
Yep. Hi there, Justine.
Hi. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing all of this. I, too, it's really interesting. Last summer, we took, my friend and I took our boys to back east for a college tour. And she said, hey, my boyfriend's sister has this house in Concord and we're going to go stay there. And I was like, oh, cool. She's like, yeah, that's where all the Transcendentalists are from. I'm like, and I went to school back east. And of course, I've heard of Ralph Waldo Emerson, but I did not know. And now I'm looking a year later, we did that trip about a year ago, and we swam in Walden Pond and we went to Emerson's house too, and like did all this stuff, and the kids did it too. And all these conversations that you're having, I mean, I'm kind of like, I'm sitting here, just my mind's kind of blown with this idea. I think this idea of bringing all of this back and how important it is right now. And this conversation around money, I mean, Maureen and Todd, I'm just really glad you brought this up, because it is very, very challenging. I feel like I'm investing more in my spiritual self more than I ever have. And sometimes it feels crazy that I'm doing that. But I also battle with these things that you say. And when am I giving away my time? When does it feel good? When does it feel of service? When do I feel like it's too much? And I get to teach a master class today in the thing that I love. And I love teaching this class, but I didn't have to negotiate the rate. It's set. But I let people come in for free a lot because I want to share it with them. But it is this is just such a, when you do something creative and you want to be paid for it, your worth is, we're always having this battle trying to understand our worth. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know where the question is in
No,
there.
I have a question out of that is really inspiring, that we ought not to think only about money when we're working. I think that's my main takeaway from what you're sharing. Money is one type of energy. And if you narrow it all down to money, you'll actually disconnect yourself from abundance. And I would say, when I've looked back on my musical career, I really never thought about money. One of the very first things that my band did was we went to Bonnaroo in like 2003, and we brought hundreds, maybe thousands of CDs. This is before, MP3s and cloud music really took off. And we just distributed them to all the festival goers. We just gave them. And as they were pulling in, we gave them a CD, said, hey, it's going to be a long wait. Here's some new music for you to pop in the CD player. And we gave, and it was an investment, right? Because we had to pay for all that. We made all those discs. But our thought was that they don't owe us anything, but we want to give them. And in time, that sentiment grew, that there was a kind of trust with that. And then I would always think about, value versus money. There was a value in that for us beyond money. It got people talking at a major festival, and that ended up giving us big returns, in the sense that word spread. People started calling us for their festivals. When people would invite us to places, I wouldn't just think about money. I'd be like, well, tell me what it's about. Tell me what's going on. What is the cause? Who's going to be there? And so I always try to think about enterprise in a holistic manner. And some people get too strict with the money piece. and they actually miss opportunities for abundance because they define their worth in dollars. And so I would just caution against that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate again that interpretation and reminder. It's not all about the money. Joan Llewellyn Burns is up.
Hello. So I have a question. I really enjoyed your talk, Todd, and you spoke about money in a way of like we shouldn't come at it from a point of lack, of worry, of like really focusing on not having enough, and I think that's a point of privilege. I don't mean it in a confrontational way, but having been for 7 years in poverty, there really is very, very difficult, even though I try to get out of that mindset of when you're trying to have enough food to feed your children and pay the rent, and you don't have enough for any of it, to get out of that mindset and say, I'm not gonna think about this as a point of lack. I don't know if that makes sense, but I just know that a huge portion of the world is where I was until a couple of months ago, right? Yeah. So what is a good way to when you're in this like prolonged, very difficult situation, to like what would be like simple ways to change your mindset around having enough?
This is
so that you're
really
not
important.
Attracting less, so that you're attracting more.
I really appreciate that, because that is a really important point. And what I have observed is that it does not matter how wealthy you are. People actually become exorbitantly wealthy because they still have a scarcity mindset. In many cases, the habits that it takes to become exorbitantly wealthy, especially if you're self-made, are almost impossible to undo once you have tons of wealth, because they're decades of habits. Warren Buffett made 99% of his wealth after the age of 65. If Warren Buffett had passed away at 64, we would never even know about him, probably. But so he's invested for 81 years. He started investing at 11 years old. Now, so the point here is that I think you can find these examples that show that scarcity and abundance are attitudes. And while it is more likely to develop an attitude of scarcity when there actually is scarcity of resources and food, it's not conversely true that if you had enough food, that you would suddenly have an abundance mindset and be a very generous person. But in my case, I also grew up extremely poor, even homeless at times, with our family staying in the basements of their friends. My parents were really young. My mom was pregnant at 20 years old, and their parents didn't have education, and they didn't have education. And it took a long time to stabilize ourselves. However, I would have never known. I had nothing to compare it to. And my parents had more of an attitude of like finding joy in nature. So even though we had almost nothing, they kept taking me to the woods. My dad and I and my brother and my mom, we would hike a lot. And I didn't get the sense that there was lack, because they kept tuning my mindset to, you have everything all around you all the time. And basically like what Emerson was saying, like, look at this, we just got an apple from this tree. And so I was always like, just feeling the wonder, but not everybody can give themselves or their children that gift. And this is what I think we have to work on together as a society, to heal the inequality, because I think the inequality is perpetuated by social dominance and hierarchical systems. And then we also have to help people understand the wisdom of abundance and get all of us out of the craze of money, so that we can really start to celebrate nature, honor nature, respect nature, and distribute the goods and resources of nature and share in that in a more egalitarian way. But I thank you. And as far as like breaking out of this, I think simple things are always give, even if it's not money. Giving tunes us into abundance. And I think like if there is a one supreme being or higher power, if somebody's giving, it means like I got to keep that pipeline going. So when we don't have money, we can give something else, and that it improves our systems, our immune functioning. There's the Mother Teresa effect, which increases antibodies in the system, and it tunes us into to the flow of more. So it could be a smile, it could be a gesture, it could be a word. But if we can teach others that abundance is not defined by money, it's so much more expansive than that. Like we have this brief flash of time on earth, and we can change someone's life forever. We could lift somebody up and build somebody up and make their day or make their world. And even though, you know, the circumstances can be super rough, if we still can live with that trust, I think really good things will happen. And they did in my case. And I know that there's an intersection of all different kinds of privilege and also inequality and oppression. There's wealth inequality, there's gender inequality. And so wherever we fall in that spectrum of privilege, so too is our responsibility to serve and to give. And, you know, I feel motivated by that as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Such a great conversation. So many great questions. I love how it came back to nature, the abundance that is available in nature. It made me think of this organization in California that's called the Fallen Fruit, where they actually create roadmaps for homeless people that they can find fruit that's hanging over people's properties and is just available. You know, and I just, I mean, we can be really innovative and clever about the ways that we can help bridge the gap, and everyone can play their part. So I love where this conversation led us to.
Can I add one quick thing? When I started the recording for the Kind Mind podcast, actually a few years before that, I was doing live talks in the basement of Linden Oaks Hospital in Plainfield, and they were just free for anybody. And in the first meeting, there was 5 people, and we sat at a table and we talked about mindfulness and meditation. And within a year, there were hundreds of people, and I still kept it free until the hospital wouldn't let us come there anymore because there was too many people coming to the building. So basically, I'm just sharing that as an example of, I felt like I had something of value, but I felt that that the people would determine what the value is. And it became a podcast, and it grew into a message that, you know, corporations and other industries and institutions that have much wider resources wanted to pay for. So I felt like I'll put this into the universe, and I'll let, you know, society and the people decide if I'm really contributing something of value, and let it circulate back in its own way, in its own time. And it did. And I don't know that that's always the case, but I think if we're always refining our art, you know, I tell many artists and other musicians, just continue to refine your art, continue to master your craft, whatever it is, because it will plug you in for sure. And we sometimes think, you know, times are changing, and this is my time to strike. Chance favors the prepared mind. So if it's not the time, don't rush it. As soon as, you know, you're prepared, then like all the farmer can do is till the field and plant the seeds. It will, you know, the rain is outside of our control. Thank you.
Well, as always, down the deep end with Todd Fink. You've given us so much to think about, and I don't want the conversation to end, but I'm grateful.
So many good questions in the chat box too.
I know.
Revisit this then, I guess.
We will definitely need to revisit it. Todd will be back with us probably on the monthly. That's the game plan. Is that still the truth there, Todd Fink?
Yep. I'm excited about that.
So maybe there's something from this conversation that we want to do a part 2, because I feel like we just kind of scratched the surface, and I would love to keep the conversation going.
Yeah, this money in abundance seems like,
Yeah, we're doing a whole.
Just a quick note, like with this, we also have a responsibility on the other end, not just as givers, but as receivers. There's an art to giving and there's an art of receiving. I've had people tell me, and we talked about this before, I can't afford your workshop, which is $200. And then I announce a retreat in Bali, and they sign up for that. That one's like 10 times more expensive. So was it that you didn't have the money, or you didn't think it was worth that $200, that weekend retreat? So sometimes we tell ourselves stories about what we can and can't afford, and it's not based on truth. It's based on fear or something else. It's good to know what we mean when we say we can't afford something, and to be careful to see how that might be cutting us off from abundance. And
because almost everyone struggles with the ebb and flow of giving or receiving, what I would say is take that on a walk in nature. Sit with your internal teacher, as Emerson would do, and say, go into your self-resolve and see what is the directions or answers or inspirations that might help you kind of smooth out those jagged places. And report back to us, because we'll be continuing this conversation with Todd Fink. And now we'll turn it over to our musician, Clive.
We decided to introduce Clive, who has been here before many times. He's so awesome. Born in England and now a resident in Ireland, Clive has been fascinated with the magical world of music and song since being a small child. He is currently engaged in writing a rock opera about love and following the guru within us all. Find his music videos and more at www.thelightireland.com. Sorry, that was really little writing. Okay, take it away, Clive. Can't wait to hear what you are going to be singing today.
My mute off. Yep. Hi again. Thanks for that introduction. I've got in the other room, there's actually about 10 ladies doing a triple goddess workshop with Mia, so I hope they don't get too rowdy. This is a song called Soldier, SOUL-DIER. I'm a soldier, armed and ready, rock steady, yes, soldier. I got no enemies, only empathy. Yes, I'm a soldier. I hear the cannons roar, see them bullets fly, but feel no fear or hate, because inside, oh, I am a soldier. Just a soldier. Compassion is my gun, I fire at everyone, right between the eyes, until their hatred dies. I'm fighting for the cause in the inner wars, until we stand as one, the last battle won. Yes, I'm a soldier. soldier, armed and ready, rock steady, yes, soldier. I've got no enemies, only empathy, 'cause I'm a soldier. Okay, a little bit here for you to join in with. I'm loaded with love, loaded with love, loaded with love for everyone. Yes, I'm loaded with love, loaded with love, loaded with love for everyone. Yeah. I'm a soldier. Now, if I can, I was thinking of a way of joining this song in with the conversation. It's called Like Water, so I thought, there we go. That's the nature bit of it, and I think the thing that we need most in abundance of is love. So, and that's what this is really about. And there's an abundance of that. We need love, oh, like water, to cleanse our bodies, to feed our soul. Yeah, love's holy water, to make us whole. So wash me down, let it rain, let me drink oh once again from the fountain. We need love, oh, like water, feel it in us, feel it flow. Yeah. To life when I'm dying, lying down in defeat. Yeah, it brings me what I need when I'm crying, crying for relief.
Thank you. Thank you, Clive. Thank you, Todd Fink. Thank you, Joni
Thanks, Todd.
and Megan
Thank you.
and
Rachel, thank you.
Rachel Beitler.
Maureen, that's the best.